now. Couldn't find a better fit for them, along with my crown. And since the baton was passed, I've been down. Cause failing's not an option, and dad is not a noun, not at all.
Welcome to another episode of Dad is Not a Noun. My name is Ishmael, changing the narrative for men of color fatherhood, as well as changing the narrative on the things I care about. And on this episode of Dad is Not a Noun, we're going to the end of Colon Cancer Awareness Month. And I'm truly honored to have this special guest with me. He is Dr. Crawford. He is with me today to share his personal story and also talk about the importance of why men in general should just get their colon checked. Again, Dr. Crawford, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
And the question I ask all my guests, because mental health is important to me, is how's your heart?
How's my heart? I like how you connect the heart to the mental state, because there's a lot of different ways, to perceive it. And actually in medicine, the heart's very vital to making sure that the brain works. But when we think about the brain, we sometimes forget about all of the wellness and emotions that come from that as well. So with respect to my heart, my heart is still not the same as it was when I had both parents. And it's sort of why Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, does have a specific place in that heart. And it comes from having a dad. So, just like what your network is trying to, foster, I was lucky enough to have an amazing father. And, I always knew that I was privileged to have two parents, and it didn't become more apparent until I actually lost my dad. And
No, go finish.
So, it's something that no one really expects. And, if you had to ask me, 40 years ago, where would I see myself? To be honest with you, I wouldn't have told you that I would be sitting here as a gastroenterologist that actually does colonoscopies, right? That's not something that a child, would have in mind. But having someone that's been afflicted by this disease, you recognize that it wasn't just him that was affected. It was everyone that he loved, that loved him. And there's so many different degrees of separation that's been affected by his loss from something that I now know is one of the most preventable cancers in the United States. So, that's why, it really sticks, to me. And in particular, it is slightly ironic that, my dad passed away on March 1st, and that's the beginning of Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. So, I think that the stars, aligned in such a way that, I'm in a position where I hope that I can reach out to other people and prevent them from having to go through all of the things that I went through, as a result of losing my dad. So for all the dads out there, hopefully, you'll understand my perspective and, do what you can to just make sure that, you don't become a statistic.
Definitely. And before we get into your father, I'm a strong believer of compassionate fatigue. I think one of the worst things is in your profession is when you tell a patient that they have colon cancer. So for you personally, how do you, I don't like using that word, turn it off and on. How do you not take that compassionate fatigue of that, telling that person and that they have colon cancer and not taking it home with you?
Yeah, so it is difficult because I don't think that there's anyone that I can turn off that compassion for. It's one of those things that actually drives me and makes me suitable to be in this particular spot. So I became a physician because, I knew I had, that heart, like you mentioned, to be able to have a different perspective on things. So my life could have gone in different directions, at that point in time when I was, trying to decide on a career path. I could have gone an easy route and said, I'll do something along the lines of business or art or architecture. There were so many different choices, but, having looked at what was around me and what I was capable of doing, it really led me to realize that part of who I am and what I had seen my parents give to me is really a part of who I am. So the same way my parents never had this compassion fatigue for me for decades, those sorts of things don't really turn themselves off, right? Your parents never get tired of taking care of you, right? Even if you make mistakes, they don't get tired of taking care of you. They keep coming back. And I sort of, have a perspective, once again, faith and religion really taught me that, everyone is family. So when I do see patients, they're family, and I would never get compassionate fatigue for taking care of family. So it's all, a matter of, perspective and knowing who you are and what you are capable of doing, just to make sure that you're contributing something to, the greater good. And, people will define the greater good in different ways. But for me, and going through high school, we were always taught, we should be men for others. And I never put myself first, because if I did, I probably wouldn't feel right about myself. So it's really, if you help someone, at some point they can help you in return. And it's sort of this positive feedback loop. As long as we give ourselves, we'll be able to receive at some point in time. You don't have to, worry about yourself, as long as everyone's on the same page and very loving.
I think that's important, and it goes back to that power of serving other people. Like some people are better equipped of doing it than other people.
Yeah, I think, a lot of it is probably situational. There are some, some individuals who are lucky. And like I said before, I was always, blessed, and I actually felt blessed, because my parents, were there. And, growing up, knowing that my parents were from South America and had, immigrated to the United States, I had a chance to see, their struggle. So I remember, growing up, having crackers, instead of, sandwiches. I knew that, you couldn't always get something from the store. There were all these struggles, that were there. And they really taught me that, at some point, in time, you're going to be able to, be someone that can, care for others and do positive good, the way that you see examples, in front of you. And my parents were just amazing role models. My mom inspired me to go into medicine. My dad gave me his tremendous work ethic. And I think it's the merging of the two that made me who I am today.
And you're doing phenomenal work, and I think that's important. I want to take a time to let the audience know your credentials, because that's the one thing, is especially being a man of color, a Black man. I know in the medical field, it's like it's like finding a diamond in the rough. If you want to take the time and just like lay out your credentials.
So my first credentials, that I was born and raised in Brooklyn. So I think that's really important, because I had the grit to keep punching through. And eventually, I went to grammar school in Brooklyn. My grammar school is unfortunately not there, anymore. It was taken over by, a public school, but I did go to a Catholic school. I went to an all boys Catholic high school in Manhattan called Regis High School. And I got a four-year scholarship to attend high school. And from there, I went to Georgetown, and I was in Georgetown, for 4 years, and I loved it. I was there at a good time, when the Hoyas, had some wins, under their belt. Allen Iverson, was there. He was in my history class at Bell Harrington. So we had some good players. So it was a good time to be in college. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. And from there, I did end up going to medical school at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut. And, while I was there, I took a year off. I did some research in molecular parasitology and molecular biology. And I eventually decided, to return home in 2001. And I joined Cornell as an intern, stayed on for my residency. I took a year off because I didn't quite know that gastroenterology was going to be the field that I would have pursued. I was going to actually apply in infectious diseases. And then I took a year off. I did research in the strangest sort of field, but I actually did research in the surgical department for breast cancer prevention. And there I studied hormonal carcinogenesis and chemo prevention. And this is where I learned a lot about the benefits of diet and all of the benefits that, plants can confer to those who consume them. And I did that year, and surprisingly, I got into a gastroenterology fellowship, once again here at Cornell. I stayed on Cornell as faculty, and I am currently the program director for our training fellowship in gastroenterology and hepatology. So I'm responsible for training the next wave of gastroenterologists that come out, every year from Weill Cornell. And that brings me to now. And that's my background.
That's amazing. Um, were you able to get in to interact with John Thompson a little bit? And if you did you learn anything from him that applied to what you're doing?
No, he was way
Okay.
protected. He came in and out, he would coach the team, but I did, know, a couple of the basketball players, sort of peripherally, because they were in like my history class and things like that. They worked hard. They worked hard, so they did their best. They made the school proud. But yeah, it was cool.
That's awesome. And let's talk about your dad. I think that's, the centerpiece of this conversation. Just talk about the impact your dad had on your life. I know he was the sparring partner for Muhammad Ali. Before Muhammad Ali became Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay.
That's right.
But just talk about just the impact of your father in your life.
Yeah. So, growing up, we initially, lived in the projects in the Navy Yards, and eventually in the late '70s, we moved a little bit closer to central Brooklyn, like right around that Midwood area where Brooklyn College is. And one of the things that I remember is that my dad was always working. I knew that he was doing something important. Didn't quite know what it was until much later, but he would spend the majority of his time working as a security officer for the Navy Yard, and then eventually he was a security guard for some of the artwork at a prestigious art gallery. And from there he became the director of security, so he would travel all over the world and basically protect a lot of the art that was going overseas. So a majority of his time he had spent traveling. So my mom was with my sister and myself with another relative, our aunt, who was there. And it was always looking for, when would my dad return, when would he come back, right? So sometimes he'd be gone for a week or two. Sometimes it would be longer, depending on an exhibit, for a month. But my sister and I were always excited when he came back. He always had something, to give to us, whether it was comic books, from the airport, or a trinket from Turkey, or, wherever he was off to. I still have those, those gifts, because they meant, so much to me. My dad was an imposing figure. And, if he said something, you wouldn't question it, right? You just wouldn't. Mainly because he was a big gentleman. He was like 6'3", high 200s. Was not fooling around. Stayed in shape. My sister and I, we would spend the summers watching him skip rope in the backyard, and just amazed how fast he could go, because he skipped like a boxer, right? So even though he was that big, he was light on his feet. He would shadow box. My sister and I would just love watching him. And, I think knowing how hard he worked for us to have shoes, how hard he worked to actually pay for us to go to a private Catholic school, always meant something to me. He worked, not just during the week and traveled a lot, but when he had time to work overtime, he was working overtime. He didn't want us to not have, what we needed. He always stressed how important education was. In fact, even though he's a boxer, and I see his face, and always sort of like brings back a lot of emotions just to see him. But that's my dad there on the left side with the sunshades. But he never wanted me to fight, right? Even though he was a fighter, he fought in order to get himself to a better position. And he used his hands to get himself here in the United States so that I wouldn't have to do the same thing. And I recognized that from an early age. When he told me, he basically said, I'm not going to teach you, how to fight because, you're a different person than I am. And I want you to study. I just want you to work really hard. Said the same thing to my sister. And we both studied. We worked, just really hard. We understood the value of education. And it really had an impact, and it made a difference. For my dad, his hands were, an easy way, to make sure that he could provide, initially for, his parents, and his family, initially. And then he just took that, and started to say, well, now I'm in a better position. Now it's time to bounce out of South America and get to the Americas, and then I can start anew. So, his hands were really, I would say, the first shovel in him, sort of like, digging new ground. And he did that, exceptionally well. And, it's really difficult to see how much of I would say a workaholic I am, because for me, when I think about what a man should be, it should be someone that people could rely on. And I worked really hard to make sure that, my mom and my family, are taken care of, that they will never feel that they can't, have something. I make sure that the fridge is stocked, the cupboards have food, that it's not just warm in the winter, that it's hot. They have that option, for it to be hot. I don't want my mom to ever lift a finger, because, that's what I saw growing up. That's the way it should be. That's the model. You work hard, you take some time, and you go on vacation, from time to time. You help as many people as you can along the way, whatever, you're capable of doing. And that's the way I think, human beings should really interact, not just, within the family unit, but with each other and other families as well. It was inspiring to have a figure like that, because looking around at the folks that I grew up with, they didn't really have that, that option or that clear figure. And I feel like some people were left trying to figure it out on their own. And unfortunately, if you don't have that strong figure who's present, then it's easy to create your own, magical thinking of what things should be, but it's really not something that can fit within a social structure. So I was lucky not only to have a father, but to have a good one who had strong moral and good values, that instilled that upon myself and my sister. And for, my little brothers, I hope that, I can, they're much younger than me, but, I hope that, what my dad had shown to me, I am still showing to them.
Definitely. And I just want to bring up the pictures because it's your dad with Muhammad Ali. And like we talked about earlier, that he was the sparring partner for, at that time, Cassius Clay. But going to the next question, I was watching a video that you did, and you talk about the significance of a gold chain around your neck that your father gave to you. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So when it's very interesting, but when we talk about colon cancer, by the time you have symptoms, it's usually kind of late in the game. And my dad had symptoms for quite some time, before people realized what was happening, mainly because he was so big and strong and fit. He had a lot of reserve, so that you couldn't tell what was going on. Although, he did bring it up to his doctors that there was a problem. And they basically looked at him and said, "You're this big, imposing figure. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just go about your business," which was the wrong thing. That, makes me a better listener, to my own patients. But, my dad had a gold chain, that was given to him when he was very young. And he never took this chain off. And I remember, going swimming, with my dad, and always see this chain. I'd be like, isn't he afraid this thing is going to fall off his neck or anything like that? But didn't phase him. This chain never fell off, never left his body. And when, my dad started to show signs of illness, he was coming back from a business trip from Africa. And basically he just became septic. So he had a bacterial infection, and he ended up, in an ICU, for probably a month and a half, and no one really knew what was happening. And I was in college, at that time. And, one of the things that was really worrisome is that when I came home, we would visit my dad in the ICU. And then one day the doctors, came out, and, they had his gold chain, in their hand. And they came to me and said that, your dad would want you to have this, so they had spoken to my dad, and they didn't want him to keep the gold chain on while he was in the ICU. And, they gave it to me, and I put it around my neck. And it was a reminder that, people can go. And it always, made me think, well, how do I man up? How do I start to be that person to take care, of my own family? And, it was always a symbol, that, this is something that my dad carried with him. This was a part of who he was, right? When you looked at him and you ever saw a picture with him without a shirt, you could see this gold chain on. I was like, this is now me stepping into his role. And my dad did make it through, that ICU stay. And when, he got out, I was going to give him his chain back. And he said, no. He was like, at this point, this belongs to you. And, I've always kept it on. I still even have it right now on, just to show you what it is.
Wow.
So it's a trinket. Of course, this wasn't as baggy or as loose around his neck, but but this is the charm, that he wore. And he had this even when he was, boxing in those 1960 Olympic Games. He took it off, at least for that. But for the most part, he's had it on since he was like a teenager. And I'm just, proud to be able to hold this, with me close to my heart. And when I look in the mirror, and I see it, when I see, my head shaved the way, his head was shaved, after he, started receiving chemotherapy, it always resets me. And it reminds me of, how much, potential I still have, and how much more I have to give, because just like a boxer, you just keep going, there's 12 rounds, you're going to give it your all until that last bell. Right. Yeah. So, that's the way, I approach everything. So taking care of my patients is my fight. Just like my dad's fight was not just in the ring, but making sure that we were taken care of. My fight is taking care of you. Right. And I will give you my all until the end. And, you had mentioned, that compassion fatigue. And, as much as, it is sad when patients have cancer, I'm still with them, even after I give them the diagnosis, I'm arranging for them to get the best care from all of the physicians that I know that I would have wanted to take care of my dad. That's who I'm plugging them into. Right. So they're getting the best care that they can.
Definitely. And I'm about to get my blurred nerd on with this terminology. Go with me. Follow me.
All right.
With great power comes great responsibility. And you have that great power of knowledge when it comes to the information, when it comes to colon cancer. So let's get into like that great power of information, because I think it's important that people know, like, what are the early signs of colon cancer, like early detection, like what are the things that people need to know when it comes to colon cancer?
Yeah. So, if you think about, the impact of colon cancer, there's big cancers that people know about, right? They know about, you've probably heard about lung cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer. But, the number one killer in the United States is lung cancer. And then right below that is colorectal cancer. And the issue that I have with colorectal cancer is that it is the most preventable cancer. So it blows my mind that the second most deadly cancer is the most preventable. And, we have ways to prevent colon cancer by finding it, even before it's a cancer, right? So we can see lesions, very early, and we can remove them, with a colonoscopy. Now, I think colorectal cancer does have a particular weight in our community, mainly because 20% of, all of the colorectal cancers, or I would say, if you look at African Americans in particular, we are probably 20% more likely to be diagnosed with colorectal cancer at an earlier age. Usually, we get diagnosed much later in the game, right? My dad's an example. He had symptoms of blood in the stool, but I'll talk about some symptoms, but he was diagnosed much later. When a cancer is found in our families, they are usually much more aggressive, by the time we pick them up. And when we do pick them up, they're harder to treat. And then if you think about, our families, we are probably 40% more likely to die from colorectal cancer than almost any other race, right? So it affects us. And men in particular have higher rates of colorectal cancer than women. So, for, this particular audience, it's really important to know that if you're Black, it's a strike against you, mainly because you're going to end up getting, something at an earlier age. So if you're not screened, the strike is you get the cancer. Second strike is going to be that it's going to be more aggressive. Third strike is going to be that you're more likely to die from it. So my whole message is really to start getting screened when it's appropriate. And if you get screened when it's appropriate, you can prevent the development of cancer in the future. And there's different ways that we can sort of test or screen for colon cancer, because you don't want to wait for symptoms. Right. And I'll give you some examples of symptoms of colorectal cancer. So sometimes it can start off as, changes in bowel habits. So usually people go to the bathroom, maybe once to 3 times a day. It all depends on the individual. There's some variation. That variation kind of gets set when, you're growing up, right? So you're in high school, how often you're going to go to the bathroom. Maybe it's after every meal, maybe it's once a day, maybe it's, every other day. If there is a colon cancer that's brewing, you may notice that there's a change in the pattern of how you go to the bathroom. Excuse me. So you may either start to develop more looser stools, you may start to develop, more constipation, and that change in bowel habits is usually a sign that there could be something that's going on inside of the colon. If there is a growth inside of the colon, sometimes it can, increase in size to the point where it can cause a blockage, and people can sometimes get crampy abdominal pain. Now, once again, these are non-specific, right? There's so many things that can change your bowel habits, like you can have a change in your diet. There's tons of things that can cause abdominal discomfort or pain. It can be your diet, it can be medications, it can be stress. But these are non-specific findings that could be associated with a colon cancer. So you don't want to blow these things off, for too long at all. And then when you start to develop, signs of blood in the stool, then this growth is probably already, on its way. And these little growths happen because the lining of the colon is made up of tiny little cells. And somewhere along the line, one of those cells just forgets to die, right? Because all cells die and then new ones generate. But one cell mutates and it doesn't die for some reason. So there is damage inside of the DNA of that cell for a variety of reasons. So when it divides, it doesn't die. So now you have 2 cells that are immortal because they're identical. And those 2 cells divide, now you have 4 cells that aren't going to die off. When they divide, now you have 8 cells, and it just keeps going in this exponential phase until you start to see, a microscopic cell start to become visible to the human eye. And that first glimpse that we can see with our eye, we term a polyp, or a little growth. And that's not a cancer as yet. It's just a growth. It becomes a cancer when it starts to outstrip its region. So when it starts to go deeper into the colon and find its way into a blood vessel, one of those immortal cells hops into that superhighway and it goes shooting off to another part of the body. And then it sticks there. And then it starts to multiply, the same way with those same immortal mutant cells. And then we call that a metastases. So if we can catch a growth at its earliest stage, ideally before someone becomes symptomatic, we can prevent that little polyp from going any further. We've just removed all of that abnormal tissue and threw it away. That's gone. You don't have to worry about a cancer happening from that spot at all. It is curative. You're not going to get cancer from that spot. So we have specific ages where we would recommend that everyone get screened. There's so much data from colonoscopies over the last several decades, and we've seen that, in the past, age 50 was the sweet spot. If you did a colonoscopy in someone at the age of 50, you would find that you can see these growths before they would become cancer. But in the African-American population, we were catching cancers at that age. So the screening age was actually brought down from 50 to 45 for African-Americans several years ago. So, a lot of people in the community are still under the impression that 50 is that magic number. But no, for African-Americans, people like us, we need to get screened at the age of 45, ideally without having any symptoms, right? So that's the sweet spot. Of course, if you have symptoms, you're going to get a colonoscopy. So I can just make sure that there's nothing else that's going on. And even if we do find something, we have some of the best resources so that you can be taken care of to get that under control, right? Because just because you have a cancer doesn't mean that all bets are off. There's things that, can be done to mitigate, further progression, surgery. There are some medications that have very minimal side effects that people can take, that can help to cure a person. Now, very, very late stages, it is what unfortunately it would be. Sometimes it is too late. But I think in this day and age, if everyone hears this message, you're going to see over the next couple of years that we're not seeing those aggressive cancers as much because we've really rooted the problem out early on, because we've screened for it. So we were proactive rather than reactive when symptoms happen. So there are a number of tests that people can use. Colonoscopy is the gold standard. That's taking a flexible camera, going inside of the colon, physically taking a look, looking for those little growths and removing them, during that procedure. The other tests that we can use are not the gold standards because they're more detection tests. So whereas a colonoscopy, you can actually do something, remove something, prevent it, you're good for 10 years. Some of these other tests can just tell you that, either everything is normal or there's something abnormal. And once there's something that's abnormal there in one of those tests, it means you need to have a colonoscopy anyway. So it's sort of like just delays or kicks the can down the road, somewhat. These particular tests can be stool-based tests. And sometimes you can look at stool and you can see if there's trace blood in the stool before it becomes bright red that you can notice it with your eye. So there are some tests that detect blood. There are some tests that can find the DNA from little growths or polyps. You've probably seen some of these commercials. I know that they used to have them during the Super Bowl, but something called Cologuard. And that looks for both blood and abnormal DNA that people can sort of pass in their stool. And then there's certain kinds of x-rays, something called a CT scan, where you kind of lay down, in this donut and you go through a scanner and it takes a series of x-rays and then it compiles all of those x-rays to get a three-dimensional image of what your colon looks like. And it can give you exquisite detail of the surface of the colon and you can actually see growths if they're there. Now, if some of these tests are negative, you can come back in, either 1 year for some of the stool-based tests that are looking for blood. You can come back in 3 years for a Cologuard. You can come back in 5 years or so if you had that CT. If a colonoscopy gives you a clean bill of health, you're good for 10 years. Short of there being things that run in your family or you having specific kinds of medical conditions that put you at an increased risk, of having, polyps. But that's the landscape, of the different kinds of tests, that one can do. And they can, be done, the stool-based tests in the privacy of your home. The other tests like a CT scan or colonoscopy do require you to come, into the office, or our radiology center in order to have those tests done. And they usually take, at least a colonoscopy takes less than an hour. The radiology exam takes about 30 minutes. But it's a small price to pay, so in terms of, that amount of time that it takes, out of your life to have years of disease-free, time with your family and your loved ones is priceless. It's definitely worth the time. But that's, my perspective on that landscape. But I can answer any questions or clarify anything, that I just said.
No. I think it's important that you lay out the gamut when it comes to getting tested and then the importance. But through the studies, do you think over time the age limit is gonna go lower for men to get tested for colon cancer?
That's an amazing observation, because we are seeing that younger individuals are getting colorectal cancer at earlier ages, and it may be that once we've looked at all of the data from screening individuals at the age of 45, we may have to think again and say that we may need to bring this age down. We don't have enough cases done to really say that it's warranted at this point in time, but from what I've seen alarming things. I can't tell you how many individuals in their upper 30s I've seen that have colorectal cancer. So my view is skewed because I see them, right, because they come to me as a gastroenterologist. But overall, if you look at everyone, in the United States, they're still, much, a little bit older when they're developing colorectal cancers. The goal is to leave no one behind. I think that if the way our environment is set in this current, landscape, if it doesn't change for the better, I think we are going to have to move, that particular, age group down. And thinking about that age, the question is, well, why? What's going on? Why would that even be a thought? And you've probably, seen this in either friends or family. Chadwick Boseman, who we met, his brother,
Yeah.
was unfortunately one of these individuals that, could have benefited from, a screening exam, if it was in our guidelines, but it wasn't. So he did nothing wrong. It's just that he was the statistical outlier. He's that 1 in a million that, this unfortunately happened to, and it's so saddening, but it does, make us aware that, there's something that's happening and we need to be aware. And if you think about when you look at all of these colorectal cancers, about half of them have been linked to a couple things that we can change. And I'm not saying that this applies to Chadwick at all, but I'm saying, like, in general, physical inactivity, poor nutrition, being overweight, drinking and smoking, all modifiable. All of these things associated with, risks for colorectal cancer. I can tell you, though, you have to take this, from different perspectives. But my dad was physically active. He ate extremely well because my mom is a tremendous cook, as well as, some of my other family members. He was not overweight. He was a muscular guy. He didn't smoke. Maybe he drank a little bit, from time to time. He's from the Caribbean. He likes a little bit, from downtown. But, for the most part, a majority of cancers, not just colorectal cancer, but, prostate cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, all of these things, are associated with not just cancer, but other kinds of diseases as well. High blood pressure, diabetes, strokes, heart attacks. So when we think about what can we do, to preserve our health, because there are some things that we can do, we want to eat more, fresh fruits and vegetables, if at all possible. You want to avoid red meats. You want to avoid, the processed meats like the cold cuts, although they're so convenient and they taste good. They're literally carcinogens. And the World Health Organization has labeled things like cold cuts and bacon as carcinogens, yet they're still on your store shelf, because it's easy to make your kids a cold cut sandwich. It's easy to make bacon and eggs, for breakfast. So there's booby traps that are out there that still exist for who knows, what reason, likely for profit, but it hurts us. So unless, we have these messages on, lifestyle changes, to avoid a lot of the fast foods, to encourage physical activity, to watch your weight. And because, being overweight is a bad thing, even though it may, look good on some people. At the end of the day, it's still bad. Tobacco, alcohol, secondhand smoke, all of those things, we should really try to avoid. Yet it's difficult because it's widespread, throughout the culture. And we just have to, do better at ignoring the things that are just accessible to us. Just because they're accessible doesn't mean that they're right. And we do need more outreach. We need more patient education as to what the true blueprint or book of life should really be like. Like, how should we, be treating ourselves? Are we getting sleep? Are we getting exercise? Are we eating right? That's got to be reinforced time and time again. I know when you see your doctors, the time is so limited. Maybe you have 15 or 20 minutes with your doctor. This is not something that, is at the top, of the list, and at some point, I think that it should be. Usually when patients are coming to us, it's because they have the diabetes, the obesity, the coronary artery disease. So it's just a catch-up game. It's like, well, how can we, plug the holes? The goal is to never develop the cracks to begin with.
Right.
I mean, that all comes with lifestyle changes.
Definitely. And then also, because you're in the center of everything, how does policy play a role in it? Because you see a lot of communities that lives in a what's that terminology I'm looking for? A food desert, where there's not a lot of areas where they can get fresh fruits. Like, there's a McDonald's and a Burger King every 5 miles where they live at. So how does policy play a role in that too?
Yeah, so a lot of policy, unfortunately, is dictated by money. And you can think that or see that a lot of the stores where they pop up are in areas where the economics will continue to support that particular store. The further north you go into Manhattan, you start to see, like, for instance, there's less Starbucks, right? Because that's sort of like this marker of economic well-being. When you go up north, you start seeing that food desert start to happen. You don't see the Whole Foods. You don't see the Fairways. You don't see, the Trader Joe's. Usually it's because, the folks that are there have trouble finding the income to be able to have, these expensive organic fruits and vegetables. So those stores never pop up, in these areas. However, that's not to say that individuals can't, afford those things. They just don't have the opportunity. I live in East Harlem. I can afford, those foods. I'm lucky. But I run into the problem where I have to travel in order to, get, a lot of the sourced foods. If I want, certain kinds of organic fruits and vegetables, I need to leave East Harlem and go find them. It's not a walk in the park. I go to our local grocery stores, and the fruits and vegetables, aren't always that fresh, for instance. And I do go into those stores and I see all the boxes of cereal. I see all of the fruit juices, and it saddens me. And I think that if, we do have enough, collectivity with, all of the people that you have access to. So all of the influencers, for instance, all of the people who have done well, from our areas. If we were able to say, this is what's really happening in our communities, just come back, figure out where you came from, and see, what do your people need, then I think we can make a change. I don't think that we should expect that someone is just going to do this, out of the blue. It really has to be us calling it out and saying, this is what we need in this particular area, and this is the reason why. And this is why we would support having this in our area. We do have to speak up for ourselves. Even physicians aren't very good at this. We are so bogged down, trying to take care of the individuals that we're seeing that are coming through our door. It's almost like, I'm going to date myself, but I Love Lucy and the Chocolate Factory. There's these chocolates, and these chocolates are coming through this assembly line, and doctors are basically trying to just save these chocolates, right? We're trying to save, the patients as we see them. And someone is speeding up this conveyor belt, getting people sicker and sicker, and we're playing a catch-up game. And we're so few and far in between, folks like, like me, that it becomes difficult for us to say, I'm going to ignore, the chocolates on this conveyor belt and let them fall on the floor and go to the back and just try to slow that machine down, because we're so invested in the person that's in front of us that it's hard for us to basically navigate the bigger picture. Now, hopefully the pipeline of new physicians that are coming along, we can encourage to not just be physicians, right? We can encourage them to come into medicine, but have a different skill set. So we need physicians that have MBA degrees, right? Have business degrees. We need physicians that have law degrees. We need physicians that have degrees in public health and public policy, in order to say, this is what we need, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to have the law protect us in doing it. And I think that we are going to start to see that change. We are late, I'll be honest with you, but we are going to see that change in the upcoming years. I'm lucky that I'm at an institution that actually got a grant from the government to be able to look at a lot of these particular issues when it comes to cancer, like the Dalio Center. And we're looking at ways increasing colorectal cancer screening, addressing some of these food deserts, within our own city, but not just helping, what's here locally, but taking that as a cookie cutter and saying, we found a way to do it right in our home. And now you in Detroit, you can take our cookie cutter. You in Chicago can take our cookie cutter. You down south can do what we found works, adapt it to your environment, and we can make progress. It's going to be a multidisciplinary approach. That's really what it's going to take. It's going to take, folks from, churches. It's going to take influencers like yourself. It's going to take voices, like physicians, from, all walks of life, whether they're from academic centers, whether they're from private practice. It's going to take individuals that have stories to share that are really going to make this sound off. We're doing our best in Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. I'm happy that I was able to, speak with you about something that's dear and passionate, to my heart. And I think that, you have such a good platform that it could be us.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I appreciate that, because I think that's powerful. Because again, like you were alluded to earlier, is that the power is in community, and bringing that, building that bridge together of physician and community, because that's one thing that was a big thing back in the days when you had Black physicians. They were a part of the community. And so I love what you're doing, because I think that's vital. I think that's important. Um, before we end this powerful conversation, can you just talk about the impact? Because sometimes people don't talk about the direct impact when it comes to, um, you know, that being, a son of a dad that lost his life to colon cancer. And I think we don't hear too much of those stories, how that impacts the family. So if you
Yeah.
want to touch on that, because I think that's a critical part of this conversation that we're having right now.
Yeah. So, it was really hard, on me, having lost, my dad. So, I was in my early 20s, when he had passed away. And I didn't get to spend, I always wish I had more time, and you always wish you had more time. If you have, your parents, spend time with them 100%, because my dad was taken away from me, way too soon. Right. He didn't get to see me graduate from medical school, for instance. That would have been, one of the proudest things, that he would have, ever seen. But when he started receiving chemotherapy and he started losing his hair, that's when I started shaving, my head. So whenever I look in the mirror, in the morning when I'm shaving, because I shave shave my head every morning, I see a couple things. I see his head in the mirror, and I see his chain around my neck. So every day, I am reminded that I had a positive figure, in my life, and I never forget it. I can tell you that I was torn apart when my dad passed away for, I would say, a good solid year. They say that grieving lasts 6 months. Mine, took a lot longer because I always thought I had more time. I can share with you that one of the things I regret and what really drives me, one of the reasons why I'm here, still in the office late at night, is when I was away in medical school, I had taken a year off, in between, my second and third year. And I was just doing research, working in a lab so that I would have the time to come back and forth, from time to time, like on the weekends to see my dad because, his cancer had recurred. He had gone through multiple, rounds of chemotherapy, multiple surgeries. So, I knew he was ill, but he fought. He was fighting every day. He was still taking my mom to work, driving her to work every single morning. And then one day I'm in the lab and my mom calls me and she says, baby, I need you to come home. Your dad's not doing well. That day he had taken her to work and he had come back and he had a lot of fevers. And, I wasn't a doctor yet, but I'm a medical student. So, there's stuff that my opinion, could help. And I said, because I knew my dad would not want me to leave work, right? He would not want me to leave, right? He never wanted anyone to call me during the day, from home to check up on me until the end of the day, right? Because he knew that I was serious about work. So I said, let me finish this last experiment. And, it took maybe about, hour and a half, 2 hours. And then I left, hopped on, hopped on the Metro North, started coming back, down. And, when I walk in, I go upstairs, to our room because my dad is, his bedroom is on the second floor. And then there's, my family, everyone is up there. And my mom and my aunt come up to me and, they hold me by the shoulder and they said, your dad is gone. And he passed away probably 15 minutes before I got home. And from that day, I could have said goodbye and I didn't get to say my goodbyes. So I work endlessly so hard because I do not want that hour and a half that I spent into the lab to mean nothing. So I give everything I have. I leave it all on the court every single time because I see my dad every single day. And I know that he would not have wanted me to have left early from work. And when I think about going through the loss of a family member like a dad, and I worry about my mom as well, is that I've never been the same. There's things that are very joyful that happen. And I don't feel like I could ever experience that full joy because there's a little bit where I would wish I could share that with my dad. Right. So it's never complete. The last time I had a sip of alcohol was before I went off to college. That was with my dad. We had a sip of champagne. I don't know if that's illegal or not, but had a sip of champagne. And and champagne was always something that would be around when you celebrate New Year's, there's Christmas, there's Thanksgiving. I will never drink alcohol. I will never drink champagne because I can't drink with my dad. And it's something that's emotionally just scarred into me. There's an emotional scar that will always be there. And I think about how sad, I am from time to time. When I think about, my dad, I'm happy when I remember the memories, swimming, being on vacation. But I think if I was ever okay then I wouldn't feel like that love was pure. And I'm okay having that a little bit of that sadness, because why wouldn't I be sad after having lost someone who meant the world to me? And I'm sure that my family members feel the same way. I know my mom has never really been the same. My sister has never really been the same. My two little brothers, a little bit younger, so they had trouble, they were like in kindergarten or so they had trouble understanding. But the loss of someone that you love, especially when they didn't have to go, um, changes you in some way. And you can be changed to just give up and just take an easy way, out and just, go where the cosmic winds take you. Or you can say, I'm going to take this experience and I'm going to harness everything that I am good at to make sure that no one is ever going to feel what that felt like. So if I can prevent a cancer, a colorectal cancer in an individual, that is, a gift from my dad.
Wow. Dr. Crawford, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you being vulnerable, sharing your story, and then just giving so much information when it comes to colon cancer, because this information has to be heard and installed in people's head. Because unfortunately, I'm gonna be honest with you, especially in our community, I've rarely heard anyone talk about colon cancer right now. And so doing my part, having you on just to share your story and share the importance of us getting checked out, then that shows that I'm doing my part. Um, how can people find you?
100%. So my name is Carl Crawford, and I work at Weill Cornell, and that is associated with New York Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan. So you can probably just look me up, Carl Crawford, Weill Cornell. You'll see my bio pop up, contact information if you're interested in colorectal cancer screening, or any sorts of GI issues. You can just always, try to reach out. And once again, I do want to commend you on the work that you're doing, because my dad never had this message. So my dad was going to, a doctor, and the doctor never offered him a colonoscopy for the symptoms of colorectal cancer. And I think if this message was available, to us at that time, back, in the 90s, it would have made a difference. So I hope and I pray and I wish you the best of luck and success in ensuring that your message and your love of your community gets pushed out, so that we all can sort of hear this, so that when the doctors aren't offering something, people are aware of what they should be asking. And that's the first step. Any test that you get for colorectal cancer screening is a good test. Doesn't matter what you pick. Just get it done. Once you hit 45, get it done. If you're 50, don't let that stop you. Still get it done. It's not just a disease that affects the individual, it affects friends and family. And although you may be gone, the effect has this ripple effect that never stops.
Definitely, definitely. And then his link will be in the description below. So if you want to reach out to him, it's going to be out there. If you have any questions or want to set an appointment with him, it will be there. Again, this has been an amazing conversation here on the podcast. You can find me on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. Type in "That Is Not a Noun." You'll find me. Again, this has been an amazing conversation. And all I got to say is trust your gut. Trust your gut. If you feel something not right, get it checked out. Again, Dr. Crawford, thank you again for your time. Again, Time is our greatest commodity, and you spending your time with me to give this important information, I'm truly forever grateful. Thank you again. Again, this has been a great conversation,